To our Service Fabric Community Q&A number 36.
Wow, that's 3 years.
That's incredible.
Yeah, wow.
You think about that.
Holy crap.
Wow.
That's quite a bit.
That's quite a bit.
Let's do a round of introductions.
Yeah. Let's start on this side.
Yeah, I'm Nandini, PM in Service Fabric.
What do you work on it?
I work on managing the service, SFRP service.
I'm Peter. I work on supportability of the Service Fabric platform and the developer experience.
I'm Mark Fussell. I work on Service Fabric and programming models.
I'm Mark Robinson, and I own the Azure Advisors community for Service Fabric.
Deep. I primarily work on Service Fabric Standalone and Service Fabric Mesh. So here to answer questions about that.
Perfect.
Okay, as always, it's just a free-for-all of any question that you want to talk about. And as much as we can, we talk about topics that we probably talked about before. We obviously can't talk about anything that's under NDA. And if you want to do that, we always advise you to join the Azure Advisors Forum and go through that. And that's the way we address those sort of things. But outside that, anything's open, and start firing away on your questions. I don't know if we have any little updates from our side that we wanted to kick off with in any way. I don't think we do.
No.
Yes. I think maybe
most of the exciting stuff is being held now because of some issues that we had with the rollout of the previous version. So we're expecting a lot of big changes to come with the next version that will ship, which is in 6.5, which is just around the corner, pretty much.
Yeah,
Oh, so we finally got that? Okay.
Yeah,
I've been gone for the last couple of days.
Major announcement is going to be the 6.5,
Yeah.
which went out in June, and then we discovered some major issues with PLB and a couple of things, and we rolled out a fix a couple of weeks ago.
Okay, all right.
So you should see some updates in Azure updates in a couple of days.
Do you want to highlight any of the fun stuff in 6.5?
I think there's a lot of cool stuff. I'm trying to remember top of my head. So for Linux clusters, SFCTL will be installed automatically. There's a lot of monitoring and performance improvement you've done. So if you have issues with your seed node, the discoverability is made easier. You're getting warnings earlier, so you have a better reliability of your cluster. And then some improvements to on the performance side, diagnostics, and some tuning improvements. If you go to the 6.5 blog, we have a blog post for 6.5 and also for the, I'll put it in the chat, which highlights all the cool features that we have released. And then we have documentation explaining what each of them does as well.
and then I guess we're on track for 6.6 now, sometime in the fall.
Probably.
Yeah.
Some big conference.
I don't know. We are still debating on whether the 6.6 or whatever the version number is going to be. 6.6.
Oh yeah, yes, right.
7.4.
Whatever it is.
Yeah, whatever it is. Sometime around Ignite.
Version next.
Yeah, version next.
Version next, yes.
Yeah, version next. Yeah.
So there's actually a pretty topical question from Wid about this. He says the last Service Fabric release was issued and rolled back fairly quickly, given the rather short lifetime before older versions are out of support. Is there anything short of using manual upgrades and waiting until the last minute to upgrade to recommend staying in date but not being impacted by potential outages or rollbacks of new versions? So basically, since our support plan effectively works as when the N+1 version comes out, you have 60 days of support to move to it. But Whit's point is that we roll back that N+1 version this time.
Yeah.
And so had he moved to it as soon as it became available, he would have had to deal with the rollback and then roll forward again, which is unnecessary stress on the cluster. So the question I think is, and Will, please correct me if I'm wrong, but the question I interpret is, should he be waiting till the 59th day basically to upgrade to the new version because then he knows that he has to, or what would we recommend from an Azure Service Fabric support perspective for how long he should wait before moving to the next version, since moving right away seems to be not optimal if we decide to roll back something.
Yeah, and to further, I guess, clarify on that, especially since automatic updates, it seems like I would have been shuffled onto the new one a lot sooner. I'm not sure if y'all ever paused when that was deploying, but it seems like if I'm not on manual, I would have wound up on this new version, which I don't know how easy it is to then roll back to previous versions.
Well, it's pretty easy to roll back to a previous version, yes? I mean, you can either do it through an ARM deployment, or even actually you can go into the portal and there's a list of versions there, and so that you can move back to a previous version as simple as issuing a ARM update for the version of the framework that you want deployed across your sort of machines, and it will do a rollout for that. So if you move
That's
forward
comforting.
and you find, yeah, if you move forward and you find that that's not the version you want, just issue a new command and it'll roll back to the previous version. Of course, it rolls through the upgrade domains depending on your cluster size and the type of cluster that you have in terms of bronze, silver, and gold, and that depends on the, it takes the length of time it does. But yes, moving between versions is not a problem in any way. In fact, we recommend if you ever move to a version you don't like it, move back to a previous version. No problem. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, but I guess I still only have 60 days then to move back to the last one, right?
It's 6 months.
Yeah, it's 60 days after the last release.
Yeah,
for
after last release, yeah. From the,
a
yeah.
major version.
Yeah.
So you'd probably want to have automatic updates on a test cluster. Try it out first, make sure it's working, and then actually do a manual upgrade of your production cluster. So in the case of 6.5, we realized the issues pretty quickly. We paused the rollout, and then we sent out the CU1 update pretty soon after. And that should be good enough for the 60 days of support. If we find users are having issues, we can always extend support beyond the 60 days. But you should definitely try it out on a test cluster first with automatic upgrades.
Yeah, I think manual in general is the best practice. Like you
Yes.
said, like for production clusters should be the case. Yeah.
So production, I think unless you really know what the impact would be if something goes wrong, I would not start with auto upgrade for production clusters. And just to close on this topic, so upgrade question, like, every release, especially major releases, we really call on what are the features or major bug pieces that we are fixing in each release. If that is what you're really looking for, then obviously you have to upgrade on day one. But otherwise, you always have time to go test everything in every production. We are not recommending to upgrade to production right away, right? So please read the release notes, please read the blog post and understand what's happening. And then, and every release, it's not that 6.5, based on what bug we discover, the impact varies. So it's not like every customer who was upgraded to 6.5 has been impacted. So just to close on the upgrade discussion. Yeah.
Cool, thank you.
Okay. Wow.
Any more?
We've done well.
Very well.
So efficient.
No, I think part of it is because we couldn't post on.
Oh, great.
Thank
I
you.
don't have the chance.
Just got a massive thread here. Oh, thank you, Lars. He says, kudos on the 3 years. I remember joining the first one. I've learned a lot from you guys. I appreciate the patience teaching us new concepts on Service Fabric and distributed systems fundamentals along the way. So you two were probably the only ones still in this room that were there in Service Fabric Community Q&A 1.
Yes.
Yeah.
I actually
Mark.
was.
You weren't even there.
No,
for
remember
Mark.
Ed? Ed was there. No.
Edward
number
Bird?
one.
Ed Price?
Yeah.
That's right. Okay, nice.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yes.
Damn, Mark. Look at that.
You should have a trophy.
They should. I wonder, like, if we could go back and see, like, over the years how Mark Fussell has changed through the community Q&As.
Thank you. It's like that photo of Times Square.
Yeah.
Times Square, where it goes, yeah.
All right. Then he says, feedback question. It's really difficult to piece together current documentation examples for running a native Service Fabric service with .NET Core with and without ASP.NET Core that uses application insights. So maybe that scenario is not interested in non-app insights logging, etc. But basically, can we have first-class documentation that's up to date with the latest app insights and .NET Core releases?
Yeah. So just to clarify on that, because it was a long thread to type out. So there's documentation that you guys definitely provide and link to. But it did take a couple of hours to kind of trace through all of that, because while you guys are making updates, the App Insights team is also making updates. Sometimes those are incorporated in packages, and then there's the newest package, the 2.70 release from them that is changing a bunch of things, and it was just hard to figure out how to piece it all together. So since I feel like that might be one of those greenfield scenarios that people definitely want to start with, of the ASP.NET Core App Insights only type logging, it might be nice to have even a template in Visual Studio that's just ready to go with that scenario.
Good feedback. Did you? I suppose when you went through it, is there anything that you particularly wrote down in our docs that you could give us feedback on, on things that you found those discrepancies.
Oh, that'd be great.
I mean, what we love more than anything is if you could send us like, okay, I read your docs. Here's the 3 places I found a bit confusing, and here's the differences inside there, and then it would help us kickstart and figure out what your difficulties were, so we could actually do that ourselves. So
Yeah,
we
absolutely.
learn from your experience.
Yep. No, and I think I noted a few things along the way in the docs. But I will definitely go back and update that a little bit as well as I go through this current project that I have.
And when you say template, are you referring to, this is App Insights, you're referring to a VS template, yes?
Right, exactly. So right now I can go click add new service, .NET Core with or without ASP.NET Core. If there was a checkbox in that dialog that let me say, do all logging through App Insights versus event source, I think that might go a long way.
Oh, I see. Yeah. So at the moment, we produce
By default, we go to event
we
source,
put
even
event source
though,
inside there.
yeah.
And it
Right.
would be useful to have, I want to choose App Insights instead.
I think the real ask
Otherwise, you have to strip it all out.
Yeah.
And you have to put App Insights inside there, and then you have to pull in the NuGet packages, and then you have to figure it all. And it's just a bit.
Exactly.
Given that we're pushing more people to use App Insights rather than event source.
Supported as a first-class use case.
It would be better if we updated that. Okay, that's good feedback. I'd also, so the VS guys,
Yes.
they built a template for us. And, we've talked about updating those.
I mean, we should work with them, and that's fine.
Was
Yeah,
it
we can
was it
provide the feedback to them.
Yeah.
Yeah, was it literally that, or was it something
There's one
else?
more piece to that, I think, to his,
There is, yeah, no.
yeah, he's got a different question. But Lars, I guess I should validate that, yes, that is a scenario that we think is
Yes.
important, and yes, it is something, you're right, we should consider and treat more as a first-class citizen.
So Lars, if you don't mind, if you could drop that into a thread on Azure Advisors and CC me
Sure.
with that kind of feedback, this is awesome. That's good stuff.
Yep, we'll do. Yep.
Okay.
Thank you guys.
I think you're right. I think we have probably dropped back a little bit in terms of event source being the generic one that we
Yeah.
have, and now we moved on to App Insights being like the one.
Right. So I think what ends up happening is most people, like you said, they either strip it out, or I think for the most part just leave event source and forget about it. Because it's just a hassle to go and remove stuff.
Yes.
At that point, and especially if you use Service Fabric's programming models, those are still writing to event source. So this is only in the case that you're using not Service Fabric-based programming models, you just happen to use a Service Fabric-based template from Visual Studio. You only care about the actual ASP.NET and .NET Core code.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's follow. Let's follow up with
Yeah.
it. And thank
Okay.
you.
There's a second question here from Lars as well. Am I wrong in thinking that we can write services that use the region.cloudapp.net certificates automatically? It might help if documentation for the aforementioned .NET Core, ASP.NET Core service, happy path scenario could also include that. So the real question, I guess, is can services use the region.cloudapp.net certificates automatically?
Right, because it's the one that gets generated when I went through the Azure portal flow to create the cluster, generate the key vault and everything. Like it creates a .cloudapp.net certificate that I can download the private key for.
Right.
So is that a wildcard certificate for, like in my case, it was east.us.cloudapp.net. Is that a wildcard certificate, and is it something that I can just create my app on and, my API.eastus.cloudapp.net, expose that as a host name? Like, is that all built in, or do I actually, if I want to do any kind of production SSL, do I
Yeah. No,
have
if you
to
want to have a
get
production one, yes, you can't use that certificate in order to make the public endpoint exposed to it all. It is a certificate. We kind of land you in this easy to get started place, but not enough to take you through to the production place. So yes, if you're exposing a production endpoint, it would be a certificate with your domain name. Yes, so it'll be that you'd have to map through. Well, you have to have a certificate that maps through to that. Yes. So
okay. Because I think that's one of the things we're moving an application from app service to Service Fabric just because app service isn't meeting our needs anymore, and we need all the reliability and life cycle, I guess, control that we get from Service Fabric. So
I think you're pointing to that in the app service world, they do that. Yes, they take that.
Right.
And
Yep. Exactly.
Expose that certificate, but they do a wildcard on it.
Right.
So I mean, it's kind of. They do a wildcard on the whole of the region that you can get used in that. No, we were sort of, we didn't go down that path. We mostly stayed with the fact that, if you're going to use, it's going to have to be a certificate that you're going to use in your public service. You're going to have to go and get one yourself. That was mostly there so that we could get clusters up and running fast using a built-in self-generated self-cert that you can use, but not one that you'd expect to use in production, that you'd have to map through to a domain name that you expose publicly through your DNS provider. Yes.
Right. Okay. I guess since it's an internal API, I can get the client that we're working with. I can get them to give us, domain trusted certificate or something that they sign themselves. And that should be okay. But yeah, I was just wondering if that was a possibility.
Did we write some best practices down on this about getting the right type of certificate and where to get it from and deploy it? I thought we originally put some inside our best practice document.
We have some best practices about securing your cluster.
Yeah.
Not as much about your application itself. But I can share out the security best practices for sure.
Yeah. Okay.
Thanks.
Okay. Cool. Yes, if yes, template would be fantastic. I'd use that. I think that's just referring to the previous point. Question for Mark specifically, from Mr.
My chat's not working for some reason.
Okay, so the question is, Mark.
Yes.
Did you make your big announcement yet? Smiley face. Are you having a chat? Like, what's going on here? What?
So we could tease Marcin. Which Mark?
No,
Mark.
no,
that's good.
I think he's referring to what's the future of the programming models.
I'm pretty sure that's what it is.
And last time I said, I was working, and I haven't been. No, we're still.
That's what it's no, right?
Yeah.
There you
go. No, I have not made my big announcement yet. The question comes in, just to be clarity for everyone, is, what is the future of the service traffic programming models, particularly in the world of service traffic mesh?
You know what? He might have just done this to mess with you and just see what's top of your mind. He might have been asking about anything else.
So. I will just say that I'm actively working on making sure that we can get the Service Fabric active programming model moved over so it'll run on Service Fabric mesh, and we run in an agnostic way. So it'll run inside a containerized workload. And I will just say what I said last month. There's a lot of work that's happening here, and we haven't. It's looking like we probably will do some Azure Advisors discussion, probably more likely in August now, time frame. So yeah, in August, I think that we will certainly reach out into the Azure Advisors forum to talk about, are you interested in particularly how you use the actor programming models, and are you interested in how those would run inside an environment where you don't have access to the machines, like Service Fabric Mesh does, or deploy it into actually other environments as well. So. No, I haven't made any announcement yet, but kind of August is probably the time frame it'll be in based upon where we are today.
You just made it announcement.
In fact, I know. In fact, I'm actually actively looking for feedback and things like that. But it'll be August now, given that it's been just the way we develop things.
Okay.
So yes.
Marcin, does that answer your question? He sent another one saying, looking forward to this discussion, smiley face. So I'm going to take that as a yes.
Yes.
Okay.
So I'm sorry I don't have actually anything concrete around this thing. It's the usual, things always take longer than you have, and I get overly optimistic.
Question from Whit. Are there any plans to either extend being able to deploy a cluster via Azure PowerShell or various .NET management libraries instead of just ARM? I find it awfully difficult to maintain and build ARM templates dynamically.
Well, there are some PowerShells we have today for deploying.
Yeah, and they give you a lot of flags actually. So you don't.
There is a PowerShell for managing and deploying a cluster. Doing an upgrade for a cluster.
Yeah.
And I think that's also reflected in the Azure CLI as well, where we might.
Correct. No, it is.
Yeah, we do have ACSF cluster create in our command line.
Yeah.
And that gives you a lot of the flags that you would otherwise have.
It gives you a lot of flags, but you're still going to want to work with your ARM template after you deploy that anyways. Yeah. Whenever you make a modification to your cluster, you want to keep it up to date. So if you have a CI/CD pipeline, you need that ARM template to define what you already have and what you're adding. And if you're just going through PowerShell, you're going to lose some of the state of your cluster. So it's better off going through ARM than just command line.
Yeah, I think to answer the question, it does fit into this interesting world where we created this PowerShell and these CLI for creating templates for a particular type, so it allowed you to have a whole bunch of parameters.
Right.
But the problem was you started getting into this world of, did you have 1,000 parameters or did you have 2? And what were the right parameters and those sort of combinations? And you quickly fell into this fact that you did need to keep the ARM definition of what your cluster looked like anyway. So we had this one which was a simple create a cluster for me. It'll also generate a search for you and set one up, but then you're sort of stuck because you don't have the original ARM to update it in the future if there are new capabilities you want to do. So I think it's good for creating some clusters that are sort of test environment ones, but you kind of generally in Azure, you still have to stick with ARM if you really want to do anything from that's resource-based around these things. You can take
I guess, it's kind of based on building up a test cluster that I could easily spin up and spin back down, especially as needed, especially for cost purposes. And so, the ARM templates themselves are terribly unwieldy. And that, once the whole thing's generated, you can go and just have it, Azure generate one, fingers crossed that it does correctly. And then, you're good from there. But especially from I want to play around with these settings. I want to be able to spin up these this many node types this time, or swap it all out. If in an ARM template, I'd have to configure a whole section for every one of the node types that I want. In PowerShell, it's just a matter of generate a very brief command.
I'd love to get your feedback on the things that you would like to see that you could easily change, if you could send that to us.
Sure.
Because we had this long debate about what were the best parameters to have inside them, and we picked some things.
Sure.
But
and unfortunately, you can't do everything in PowerShell. So I wound up with this ugly hybrid where I've got, the .NET management that spins up most of everything, just because I can build that quickly. I've got PowerShell for a couple of intermediate things that you just can't do in the management libraries for whatever reason. And then finally, the last resort for ARM for anything that's just directly related to Service Fabric, since you can't do that in the other two.
Yeah. Could you? So we'd love to get your feedback on. I used your PowerShell commands, and here's the limitations I found, and where are the boundaries between those, because that would help us a lot about where we think we should do any updates around these things. Did you also know that Service Fabric is integrated with Dev Test Labs or Azure Labs?
I've heard of that thing, but also I've never used it yet.
Okay, so the only thing that's interesting there, and they point out to two things. One, totally independent of Azure Labs anyway, is that inside in a Service Fabric cluster, you can map the D drive for where all the system services write their state for the state of the cluster into a remote store if you want. So that means that you can shut down the cluster and restore the cluster at will without preserving all the state of the system services. And so you can shut it down and bring it back up again whenever you want within the bounds of, it takes time to recover the state from a remote store. So
is there any chance of bringing that to other platforms? Because even just being able to do that and take snapshots of the disks so that I could just do recoveries would be fantastic.
When you say other platforms, this is just
I guess outside of dev test.
Oh yeah, no. So that's what I'm saying. It's a simple entry that you just simply have to change inside the Service Fabric settings. There's a drive mapping, and you can just map it to any mapped drive. It's got nothing to do with dev test. You can just go into your ARM template and map the
data path. Yeah, there's a data path setting that you can map.
Yeah.
And you could use like a managed disk if you want, or just any remote disk.
Yes.
To save state.
And so that's just in your own template. And then if you killed your cluster and then you redeploy it again, it'll just reload that state from the managed disk and keep your cluster going.
Okay, great.
So a lot of people do that in a test environment, just because you can just blast a cluster away, deploy the ARM template again, and do the map drive. We should post it. Where is it in our docs somewhere?
No, we don't have any docs.
Let's get our docs updated on this. So there's a thing called data drive that maps.
Yeah.
But the reason why I mention this is because Dev Test Labs specifically posted an ARM template to show how to do this. So if you go into Dev Test Labs and go through it to pull down the ARM template that they have for the Service Fabric cluster in Dev Test Labs, they explicitly show an example of the cluster that maps the data drive onto a remote storage, so you can then take advantage of dev test labs scheduling capabilities. That's all. So
Great. I'll look for that.
they're a scheduler. They just say, start this resource at this time, shut it down at this time, and do this number of many, and kind of do a bounded box around it all. They integrated with Service Fabric and then gave an example of an ARM template that mapped the data drive to a remote storage, so you could start them and shut down Service Fabric clusters like that. So it's just a useful technique. You can run it in production like that as well. You just have to decide whether the cluster environment that you have satisfies the throughput and creation needs of the services that you're deploying into it all. That's all. So, if you create services fairly infrequently, or you don't have a lot of scale and high throughput, you can keep your cluster like that in production. But if you're creating like thousands of services and deleting thousands of services and putting a lot of pressure on the system services to do lots of writes and reads, then it'll impact the overall speed of creating services inside your cluster. So there's nothing wrong with running a production cluster like that as well. It just depends upon the perf and characteristics of your application.
Yeah, and there's a bunch of edge cases that may not work as expected if you're using a remote disk on a production cluster. So I would do a lot of testing before going into production on that.
Yes.
Okay. Another, I guess, feedback-ish thing from Whit. From a documentation perspective, it'd be great to see more clarification around ideas like how to override service configurations based on dev prod variations. And so you punch the link.
You can set the parameters. You can set the parameters for dev. You can set for production in the little XML stuff that comes in the templates. And I just found the Stack Overflow answer saying, yeah, if you want to swap these things out dynamically, do it this way. And it never occurred to me, oh wow, that's how you could configure them all on a per service basis within this overarching configuration that you're building anyway. And so concepts like that would be great to see just in the Service Fabric documentation.
Yeah, you're talking about handing in application and service parameters or application parameters at
Exactly.
time of creation. Yes.
Exactly. Yeah, because I knew it was possible to do that. Within take the production or the dev and put that into the overall cluster configuration. I didn't realize that you could override the individual application configurations with that.
Yes.
So just a further note of where the documentation could be a little clearer instead of hiding neat answers like that in Stack Overflow.
True. Okay. So we actually created an application best practices section. Maybe that's a good place to put that.
Yeah, we can definitely add it to our best practices. And if you ever find any documentation you want to improve, make sure to open a GitHub issue and we triage those.
Yeah.
And it just helps us find out what we need to add to our documentation.
You can do that from the docs page itself.
Yeah, you can do it from the docs repo itself.
Yeah.
Right on the page, click open an issue, say what you want to see from it, and we'll definitely take a look at that.
Yeah. It would help us if you do that, because we have a whole bunch of doc people who triage all these things, and then we'll push this up the stack, and then it actually gets action to be done, because then we have to address it. So that would help us a lot. But yes, we hear you. Yes, sometimes that gets a little bit hidden, that capability. There's lots of wonderful capabilities we built over the years that are there.
Where are we deep?
Next one from AJ Marshall.
There you go.
You see that?
Yep.
Yeah. What plans are there in place to integrate with Azure App Configuration, and what are the best practices to use that service in conjunction with Service Fabric? Azure App Configuration. I don't actually think I've heard of that.
No, there was a service we released recently.
ADM, Azure Deployment Manager.
No, this is different.
This is different.
Azure
Yeah,
application configuration.
Okay.
It's a new release, actually.
Yeah, which I believe is like a centralized config place that you can keep all your config data and pull everything from. And we haven't really spent much time looking at it in any way. So the answer is like we're not doing anything to integrate with it at the moment, because we haven't really had
Maybe
a lot
they've
of people,
done stuff?
We haven't had a lot of people push us to ask. You're the first person actually who's asked this question.
Yeah.
Never use term centralized configuration.
Yeah, I was about to say
Matt
centralized
Schneider,
configuration.
because he will go nuts.
No, hold on. So
Well,
it's meant for like key value settings and storage settings for deployment pipelines, release processes, and like secrets.
Yes, I know, but I guess the question is that you have to. The thing you have to be attentive to is, okay, if that gets used as part of your deployment process for injecting things inside that may be okay, where you pull them from that. But I would never use it in an application that's at runtime, because if you blast and say a centralized configuration and you say I want to update all these applications at the same time,
right,
you'll end up with the issues that we've had in the past, which is you will suddenly cause an outage because you updated all your applications instantaneously and blasted out some wrong config settings without testing them, as opposed to rolling through upgrade domains, which give you validation as you go through them, and if there is any issues with that, you roll back. So the whole premise of Service Fabric has always been be very attentive to how you do very controlled rollouts, where the application configuration settings do a staged rollout as the application goes, not blasting updates to an application that can read centrally from one place, because you can cause outages that way. So it always feels tempting to have the centralized configuration store, but you are at the risk of always having the a centralized config store do a wrong update and blast everything across all of these. So I think to answer your question is that we haven't really looked at it.
So I just did actually, and it seems like it would sort of be agnostic to Service Fabric.
Oh, it's totally agnostic.
So the way, like, you download an SDK, you add a NuGet to your .NET code, it refers to some set of KVS stuff that's running, some key value pairs that are running in an Azure config resource. So if you want to use it with Service Fabric, you can.
Totally. Yeah. There's no reason why you couldn't use it with just like you could use any other service. But be attentive to if you're going to use a Service Fabric, if you're going to say all my applications are using this thing and I blast this thing out and then every single one of your services changes at the same time, that's not the recommended practice of how we built Service Fabric rollouts for these things. So you would be open to that thing. If you're using it for well, again, and I wouldn't necessarily use it for certificate management either, because I'd use Key Vault for that. So I would put certificates inside there. So I wouldn't use it for updating any of my running live services, and I wouldn't use it for certificate management. So maybe it's useful in my build pipeline for something else.
Right. They do have integration with CI/CD pipelines where you can pull config out of Config Manager as a part of your CI/CD workload and then deploy that config. I would go that way rather than the live config.
I see.
Yeah, he's in a different room.
Yeah,
I just realized.
Yeah. Oh, is that Matt?
Yeah.
Oh.
his hologram was supposed to be.
Yeah. I see. So Matt, you're a world expert on this topic. Do you want to add any more?
Yeah.
No.
Alex, I think his name is Alex Marshall. Do you have any other questions on that? Any follow-ups? Does that sound good? I'm gonna wait for him to either post back or unmute himself. I think we can keep going.
Sounds good.
Any news on bring your own VNet in Service Fabric Mesh? It's a great question. We're making progress. Let me put it this way. We've got a lot of dependencies that have to be worked out in order to actually get this working. We've made really good progress from the actual getting a container to run inside a customer-provided VNet part, but we still need to make progress on how to surface that up through the networking stack as well as through the compute and then Service Fabric and then the mesh stack. Good news would be we just went through a planning phase. We're all committed to getting this done in the upcoming semester development. So hopefully, the next couple of months, that means there's going to be some good news, some more good news, I guess. But then the bad news is we still don't have it yet. Still working towards it. It's a top priority for all the work that we're doing for any serverless infrastructure for containers at the moment. So it's definitely top of the stack for us. And so we're working on getting it there. There's also some subtle differences for whether or not this will be enabled for Linux deployments and Windows deployments. So we're trying to do our best to get around those and unify the stack as much as possible. That's why you've seen some efforts from us as well on Hyper-V-based containers and settling on just using Windows OS. That's also increased the amount of work that we have to do to pull this off. So as a result, it is certainly taking a little bit longer than we initially hoped, but making good progress, and hope to have some updates for you maybe in 2-3 months' time. Okay, another question from Marcin. Do you plan to add support for the new Azure DevOps features like environments? Currently, they only seem to support K8's namespaces. Azure DevOps features like environments. It's a great question. Anybody familiar?
I think environments allow you to specify sort of a templated like structure, yes, and you can use that as the way it goes. Do you want to?
Yeah, I don't think we have any plans to support that
Yet or?
yet.
Okay.
We might support it eventually, but not at this point.
It's more that they would need to support us. So I mean, they built specific integration for AKS, and we need them to do some similar things. AKS has, let's just say, it's easier to throw random things into an AKS cluster because the workers can come from anywhere and join an existing environment. Whereas Service Fabric has this holistic notion of a cluster that you kind of have to maintain. So it's harder for the DevOps pipeline to kind of just hook something up to an existing control environment and have it do some work and validate the results and then take it back out. This is something that we have looked at. Probably it's come up in the entities discussions with the DevOps side, but I don't think we have any integration plans with them at this time. It is something we understand is useful.
Okay. Recently, oh wait, he's got just a feedback item. I'm deploying at my customer, and I must say that the level of control in ARM is pretty awesome. I really love the model with SFRP, with which you can join VMs and VM skill sets. It's incredibly elastic, convenient, etc. He's also amazed by the success ratio of cluster deployment, so that's good. That means our RP SLAs are actually doing well for our customers. So thanks for the feedback, Marcin. Great work, Nandini. Yeah. Recently, the ephemeral OS disk went live. I feel like it would make a perfect fit to the Service Fabric cluster I've supported in D series, not only DS. What am I missing? Why wasn't the D series support not prioritized for internal Service Fabric clusters?
Oh, well, I mean,
Wait.
Customers.
Hold on.
Internal SF customers.
No. Let's clarify.
Yeah.
Marcin, are you trying to say that Service Fabric doesn't support D series VMs?
No, I think he's saying DS series.
No.
I'm saying that the problem is that they are introducing this new great feature like the ephemeral OS disk to the scale set and the VMs, and they choose to go with DS series, which are useless for Service Fabric because you don't need external drives as you have the Service Fabric volumes, and you want to give the machines all the ephemeral OS disk. Or all the ephemeral drives, right? So you want to give SSD drives to the Service Fabric, not to the cache for accessing external storage disks. So and I think that the ephemeral OS disks removes from the equation a lot of Azure storage dependencies. So in case of Azure storage outage, it will not cause the outage of the compute. So it also improves the availability. So I am pretty much surprised what I am missing, and I'm curious what I am missing. Why internal Service Fabric customers weren't pushing on adding ephemeral OS disk support to the D series instead?
Sure, I think most people just haven't adopted it yet, and also many internal customers, for whatever reason, have ways of getting the same behavior out of Azure, such as in Service Fabric's world, actually, a lot of internal workloads either don't run on Azure or run on cloud services or run on some mix of environments where they can still get this. So, for example, I'm sure you know that the ephemeral OS drive has been a feature of cloud services since very early on. So many people that are still there are treating this as a migration blocker to VM scale sets, and so they just haven't moved a lot of things there yet. This was kind of the same deal that we ran into with things like OS patching, where it's a feature that exists in other environments, and then in order for those internal workloads to move to VM scale sets in other environments, they have to support the same features. So we've seen these features slowly move over. Ephemeral OS disk is the latest one. Some small workloads do run with that already today, but there's a lot of heavy disk using workloads that haven't made that migration yet. We're waiting on features like this. So I expect that we'll start to see more of them be able to move now.
Okay, so maybe the D series will come to the ephemeral OS disk support.
Yeah, I mean, we hope so, certainly, and it's something that we've talked, or at least I've talked with the team about.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
And
No,
OS,
I don't have any
disk.
I don't have any commitment or time frame for it, but
Yeah,
I think that hopefully that they would consider that, and I think that more internal teams will start to put pressure on them for that to happen.
And the OS patching seems to be working fine, right?
Right.
Or am I missing something?
No, the OS patching actually came along quite well.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, so yeah, I mean, to clarify, just looking at the ephemeral disk is only supported on disks that have premium storage today, and wouldn't it be nice if they supported other things that didn't have premium storage?
Cool. Lars, he's caveating it with, if this is too long, you can skip it. Lars, we've got time, that's fine. So this question begins. I have an application design that I'm trying to optimize for latency and wondering whether it's a good fit for certain service traffic native capabilities. What are your thoughts on two possible approaches here that I've come up with? So he's talking through. Actually, Lars, do you want to unmute yourself and talk us through the scenario? It might be a little easier than me just reading what you've written.
Yeah, sure. I'm actually wondering if I should just share a whiteboard. It might be the easiest way to do this. But basically,
sure. Yeah,
Lars, you can do that.
Yeah.
All right, cool. So basically, we have users collaborating on what I'll call documents. They're just large, complex F# object graphs. When I say large, they're in the dozens of megabytes. Once we get better test data from the users, it might be even a little bit more than that when you're looking at what it is in memory. So users are collaborating on those using commands. And so let me show you here kind of, so overall flow, we have a user in a browser. They send commands to an API. And I'm assuming this API will be hosted on Service Fabric. Right now it's on App Service Plan. And from there, the high-level logical flow is that the command gets processed for each document. So I'll put a document here. And then the command gets applied. So we'll apply the command. And then there's various downstream processors that have different computations that need to be run. Some of them are quite expensive, some calculations that may take 10, 20 seconds. Some of them are really cheap. And then at various points, we send notifications to the client via SignalR. So Azure SignalR service. And I'll just put a notification here that gets sent back to the client. And then the client needs to get the updated state of the document as well as some of the output from the backend processors. So what we've done to get the client updated state cheaply today, and again, this is pre-Service Fabric, we are writing the state from these documents back to blob storage. And then we're using a shared access signature to retrieve that. And that ends up taking a lot less load than having to try to get that all sent through our own API. So we direct the client to a particular blob that's always being updated for that document. The backend processors right now are doing the same thing. So they're writing to blobs, and then the client is given shared access signatures to those as needed so that they can request the data. So we have a couple of problems in this, and I'm trying to optimize for latency. One is the serialization time of sending this to blob storage. Takes a little bit of time, but that's probably not something I can easily tweak. The other part is that these backend processors, so today these are all separate like functions or web jobs. And right now they're all grabbing the same state from, I'll say, blob storage, from Cosmos, from different places that we have the data stored. So that's being read here, and it's being read in all of these different places. But it's all reflecting basically this golden status of what's in this document processor. So the two designs that I'm looking at, one would be to switch the document processor to an actor per document. And in this scenario, you have all of that state stored locally inside the actor service. And then the question is, can the client read directly from that? So what happens with reads in this case? And then, then the downstream processing, I'd have to figure out exactly how that would be done. In the second option, rather than using an actor, I'd be using a partitioned stateful service. So I'll say partitioned stateful pipeline, where all of these different blocks are essentially part of one network using something like TPL data flow. So there are different blocks that handle all of this, and then potentially just some of the state is stored in a local, local service fabric state, maybe just this key document state again. And then again, the question is how does that work with reads? If what is there a contention on that? Do I serve the reads from secondary replicas? Am I even thinking about this correctly?
What's the size of the document?
Let's say it's so in storage, it's about 20 to 30 megabytes. In memory, it's obviously a bit less than that.
And when you say it's a document, is it a document that you do lots of writes and updates to?
So the only writes that are done to the document are in this command processor stage. So there are clients doing a lot of these, several updates, in the worst case, 2 to 3 updates per second. Just almost think of it like a spreadsheet or a Word document. Each command is one update to a part of that. Adding a row, editing a value, those types of things.
And then it remains. Then it remains static, or does it constantly have those updates, and then the clients, which are those arrows on right, read from that? Do they?
Right. It's constantly updated. So throughout the day, different users are collaborating on these documents, and they're getting real-time notifications of other people's updates via SignalR. Yeah.
I see. So then the clients are always the clients, which are those the processing things on right, are always just reading the state of that document and then pushing updates back.
Correct. Yep.
And your second one, your stateful partition service, is still. You still got to keep a single document together. You can't split.
Right. I'm always keeping a single document. The question that I have is, should I use an actor model for this part here? Let me use a highlighter instead. Should I use an actor model for this processing logic and then have separate downstream services that each read from that? Or should I combine all of this into a single process, in which case I can't really use the actor model because I'm also doing a bunch of I/O. That's kind of where the question comes in.
I think my rough guess is that even if what's the read like these consumers on the right, how often do they read?
They read once for every command, because so these aren't necessarily the end consumers. The end consumers are the users over here. Right. So if you've got like 5 users connected to one of these documents, these over here on the right, these are just processors, and they will run once for each command.
Mm-hmm. And so we're talking like commands per second, like.
Yeah, let's say per document you've got 3 to 5 commands per second. Let's say 5.
So I think, how long do those runners take to execute typically?
It's a wide range. So some of them take 100 milliseconds to run, depending on some of the I/O they're doing. Yeah. Some of them have calculations that take 10 seconds to run, and then they have some I/O to do.
So I think the problem that you'll run into with that thing being an actor is that the actor is inherently not going to support these parallel operations.
Right.
Even if reading the data out is taking multiple seconds while that data is being read out of the actor, that actor can't do anything else.
Oh, okay. So, even if it's read from like a secondary replica of the actor?
We don't expose access to those. Yeah. You don't see them.
Gotcha. Okay. Yep. Because the reason I'm asking this is I had tried to do actor-based pipelines and networks in the past on Service Fabric, and it didn't perform well. So that's...
Yeah, the actor model is very specifically single-threaded. I think if your goals are lowest latency and best performance, then actors are going to end up getting more in the way than they're going to help. So it's a convenient programming model, but I don't know that it has the fundamental access patterns or performance on a given chunk that you're going to be looking for. Okay. So I think that pushes you either into there's one kind of master service that has the actual doc in it, and then a bunch of separate workers that are also separate services, or as you mentioned, you can club them all together.
Right.
I think this is something that I'd be, willing to continue to help you out with. I don't know if we can do it on the call here, but my guess is that either one or more stateful services and access to the collections will be the way you want to go here.
Okay. That's
When
really
is-
helpful.
I
Thanks.
had a very similar problem, and I started with actors and
Mhm.
ended up with custom actor implementation on top of stateful service. So basically, the biggest difference was that I was exposing HTTP endpoints to the actors, um, and it is working pretty well. So I didn't check this with remoting v2 because I believe it is impossible to live with remoting v1. And this is when I started to do this redesign of actors, right? So maybe with v2 it would be better with the new capabilities of v2. So when you can control the serialization and avoid data contract serializers and stuff like that. So
Right.
to me, this really looks like an actor scenario, but I don't, especially if you have if all the changes and modifications are related to the commands, because actors give you then the turn-based concurrency, and it really helps getting a consistent view of the commands. But I don't understand some parts of this with the processors on the right. So
Yeah, I guess the best way to explain that, and I think in your scenario, are you still working with like project planning software?
Yes.
Okay, so think of the document in the middle. This isn't project planning here. This is more about a totally different problem domain. But let's say you have a project plan as your document, and then your one of the downstream processors maybe is doing some calculations to rebalance the project plan. To reassign resources or something like that, and it doesn't go into the plan per se, but it results in maybe a report being generated.
Okay, so if in this case, I would do this in Actors, the especially optimized version of Actors. Probably V2 would work. And what I would do, I would download the document for the rebalancing from the main actor document.
Okay.
Just download the information, disconnect from it, just download the information, do the processing asynchronously, and come back with the results to update the data in document. But the important thing is with actors that you want to keep the operations as short as possible. If you can do this, if you don't open long-running transactions on your documents, you should be fine. Especially if you are going with 5 transactions per second, it should be very easy to achieve.
Okay. So, and then basically that ties in with what was it Matt was saying before, using the partition stateful service for the document processing.
I don't even think you have to use a partition stateful service. I mean, I don't know about what if do these consumers come and go?
Well, so it's two things. The 5 commands per document is per document, but then you might have 20 or 30 or 100 of these in flight at any given point in time. And then people do come and go throughout the day. A document usually gets worked on for about a month, and then it's archived.
Another thing that we've seen people do is have kind of abstract pools of workers that live in the back and get assigned a particular task which they complete, and then if they are cold for some period of time, they get cleaned up. So that sort of pooling model and having a bunch of separate services, kind of so you're not creating a partitioned service and then trying to figure out how to map the work into. You have a pool of workers that are all kind of picking up tasks from some other queue or being handed work by somebody. And then are able to continue working as separate services. And then if you need to grow or shrink that pool in order to handle the number of tasks that need to be performed, then that's kind of a separate pool, shrink, grow operation. I actually have some goofy sample code to handle this sort of service pooling thing. If you want to send me an email, we can work on it.
Thanks. And then with the partition stateful services, I can read from secondaries, right? That's basically the
with services you can with raw services you can always read from secondaries. We just don't recommend it because there's some pretty gnarly consistency bugs that can show up. So let's prove that a scaled out multi-service or multi-partition thing in the back can't meet the read requirements before we go to secondaries.
Got it. Okay, got it. Oh yeah, because it's already partitioned. So
right.
Yeah,
the primary, if you have many primaries, then the workload's already distributed and it's distributed on multiple machines. So
right. So as long as the primary is able to serve reads kind of sort of simultaneously with writes by just doing transactions around the writes, I should be okay.
Yes.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, that's the whole the value of dropping down from the actor model to the collections model is that you have much more control over concurrency, and what your reads and writes transactions really look like and how you want to interleave them. Of course, that's more complicated, and you can screw it up, but you also get a lot more control.
Perfect.
And a lot of benefits from actor model comes also that you can have much more complex in-memory representation with in-memory data structures helping you to navigate. So if you have a pretty large state that is deserialized into a pretty optimized structure that is not easily representable using the service fabric primitives like key value store or something like that, then you benefit a lot from actor model just keeping the data deserialized.
Right. That was part of the reason for trying to do some of this. So perfect. Thank you guys. Super helpful.
One last tiny little point I'd add is all those arrows pointing out to the right, are they supposed to be a workflow or are they all independent of each other?
They're all independent of each other. Well, to a degree. There's some processors that then call a second processor after that and so on, but they're largely independent.
Okay. The only reason I say that is one piece of work we're trying to push out is that in Durable Task Framework, it's a workflow-like scenario thing where we've integrated, we're pushing a change into the GitHub repo that allows that to build on reliable collections. So you can basically do durable, long-running workflow-like scenarios by using Service Fabric as a state store for the workflow when you call onto multiple methods if you're using the Durable Task Framework.
Oh, wow.
We can talk more about. Yeah.
This is the same Durable Task Framework from functions?
Yes.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Well, the durable functions builds on Durable Task Framework.
Right. Yeah.
Yep. Now we started building a lot of reliable workflows because a lot of people use Service Fabric.
This is a big news.
Well, it's just in a GitHub repo, so I'll post something. Let's bring this topic up next time. I'll put it along at the next community call. Let's bring this up and we'll dive into it a bit more because by that time we should have the GitHub repo posted. But we've just been
fantastic.
With the Durable Task Framework, we've been showing to people a lot how this is a great way of producing reliable, long-running workflow-like scenarios where you want to call A and B and use Service Fabric reliable collections as a state store around it. Rather than today, they plug in Azure file storage and it's very slow as a result. So let's talk about this topic next time. Let's bring it up and we'll have a great time with maybe even a demo.
Yeah, that'd be wonderful. So real quick from Whit, do you have the link for the stateful repo?
I think you just answered that. It's not public yet.
Yeah.
Okay.
No. Yeah, I'm waiting on a team, the Event Hub team actually. And there's an engineering lead inside that to push out the GitHub changes into the Durable Task Framework. And I've just been pinging him now. But it's a good topic for us to talk about generally, about another way of building long-running durable scenarios, particularly when they look like workflows inside here. Because it's always something we've had a lot of questions with. And the advantage of a durable task workflow is it keeps the entire state stack. So, when you recover the state of where the actual variables were all running before because it persists out the entire call stack. So it's not just the state inside it; it's the compute that gets started as well. So it makes it an interesting scenario if you call service A and then service B, and then your service fails over, and you don't want to call service A again, which
Right.
requires you to track that all yourself.
That is actually very interesting because that's a big part of what my downstream processors were having to deal with, that I'm trying to figure out how to make everything at least idempotent so that partial failure isn't such a problem, but that would be really nice.
Durable task framework using, ping me, mfussell@microsoft.com. I'll hook you up with the engineering lead on Event Hubs, and then you can personally talk to him about when's your GitHub changes happening. It's very useful. We've just been having a lot of that happening at the moment. And in fact, we're building a lot of our own service using that. Because so much is built on Service Fabric, we're seeing a lot of what's called our resource providers, which have in ARM have to do the same sort of thing. I call it ARM service, I call that ARM service, I call this ARM service. My service fails over, I don't want to call other ARM services that are already called for stuff. I just want to carry on where I left off.
Okay, I think we're at time.
Okay, we're at the top.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you very
folks.
much.
Have a great
See you
next
next
3
month.
years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have a great one.
Yeah, next 3 years. All right.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys.
Yes.
Yeah.
See you next time.
Well, we need to 50.
50 is just one more year.